So this morning we're continuing our series on women of the Bible, great heroines of the Bible. Last week, Ellie brought us the story of Deborah, a story of battle and violence, blood, guts and murder. And so today the male gets the story of tragedy, romance and a happy ending. We're shattering gender stereotypes here. Open Door Church, beware of the glass falling from the ceiling. I won't lie, just a little bit of gratuitous violence or something vaguely masculine would have been welcome, but never mind. It is a wonderful story, the story of Ruth, which hopefully we're going to get a PowerPoint. There we go. So this is a story that's set in the time of the Judges. Ruth has a book of her own in the Old Testament. Amazing. Not many people have got that. And it's between the leadership of Joshua, who led Israel into the Promised Land, and Saul, the first king of Israel. It's a pretty awful time in the history of Israel. It's a time when there was no continuity of ruler and governance, little moral guidance, limited law enforcement. In fact, in the book of Judges, it says everyone did as they saw fit. And it was a time when Israel really lost their way, both spiritually and morally. It's a pretty shocking book if you read it. There's idolatry, there's priests for hire, there's deceit and theft, and there's violence and battle, theft, rape, murder, genocide. It's all in there. Horrible stuff. And it's a time when women were very much treated as secondary to men and dependent on them, and in some cases, effectively property. The book is 4 chapters, so too much to read. You might as well just download it on Audible or something. No point in me reading it, the whole of it, because there'll be no time for anything else. So I'll tell the story, and we'll dip into it at certain points. Hope that's okay. So first of all, I want you to imagine Kenny and Naomi are a British couple living in Gibraltar, the beautiful British colony, the gateway to the Mediterranean. Kenny's the provider. They're a happily family together, doing well, enjoying sun, sea and sand down there in the south. And then Kenny is made redundant, and there's no income. And suddenly they're really under pressure financially. They can't pay their bills. They're struggling to feed the kids. And it's all very, very difficult. And then a job opportunity, one job opportunity comes up, and guess where it is? It's in Spain. Now, as we all know, relations between Spain and Gibraltar are not exactly great. The Spanish think we nicked Gibraltar and it belongs to them. And so Kenny and Naomi are not exactly guaranteed a warm welcome, but they have no other options, no other opportunities. And so they set up, they emigrate, they settle in Spain, and their 2 sons, Marley and Kieran, fall in love and marry Spanish girls. And everything's happy and wonderful. And then tragedy strikes. One after another, Kenny and his 2 sons, in different ways for different reasons, all of them die. And Naomi is left alone with her 2 Spanish sisters-in-law. So she decides to return home, to go back to Gibraltar, where she came from, where she knows people, where she speaks the language, where she's familiar. And she urges her daughters-in-law to remain in Spain, to stay with their people. And one of them returns home to her parents. What will the other one do? What decision will she make? That's basically the beginning of Ruth's story. The names are a bit different. In the case of Ruth, they emigrated not from Gibraltar to Spain. Oh, sorry, I missed a couple of slides. We'll strike out Kenny and his sons. And in the case of Ruth, they're not emigrating from Gibraltar to Spain. They're going from Israel to Moab. It's because of a famine. And it's not recent. We're talking about the early Iron Age, basically. Long ago, far away, very different. And this is a family that in their culture is as broken as a family can be. No man, no children, no heirs. The man was very much the provider of the woman. He was the material provider. He was the provider of status. A widow had pretty much the same status as an orphan. She was a nobody. Nobody to protect her, nobody to care for her. And the man was also the provider of children, and the children would look after the couple in their old age. There's no old age pensions, no other provision for their age. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law are basically destitute with no security at all. And Naomi has made this momentous decision to go back home. So we're going to pick up the story in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 11. And I'll put it up on the screen. Hope that's just about large enough. So Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." And at this, they wept aloud. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. Naomi meaning pleasant. She told them, "Call me Mara," meaning bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. So Naomi tells Ruth to go home. But as far as Ruth is concerned, she is home. Naomi is her family. You've got to think they've had a good relationship. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, his name means "my God is king." So he's a devout man. Ruth has found God, and she's found a home in the household of Kenny and Naomi. We don't know what her birth family was like. Maybe she didn't have a great relationship with them, but for whatever reason, she's home. And then she's arriving in Israel, not just as a widow, not just as someone unprotected and unprovided for, but she's a complete outsider. She's marked out as different by her speech, her accent, her idiom, her culture aspects of the way she lives. She's not one of them. She's a foreigner. More than that, she's a potential enemy. There's a history of conflict between Israel and Moab. Is this woman a Moabite spy, perhaps? She's also unclean. She's the daughter of an uncircumcised Gentile. The law of Moses specifically excluded Moabites from the congregation of the Lord, even to their 10th generation. So she's vowed that your God will be my God, but when she arrives, it seems like that God doesn't even want her. Complete outsider. She is not going to have experienced an immediate welcome. I want to say this, perhaps some of you have experienced rejection, either arriving or growing up in the UK, because of your race, your colour of your skin, your gender, your background. Maybe some of you have even been told to go home. And if that's happened to you, I want to say, I'm sorry. That should not have happened. That should not have been said. And I want you to know, and we all want you to know, that you are welcome here. Everyone is welcome here at Open Door Church, regardless of gender, race, colour, speech, background. At the end of the day, if you go far enough back, we're all immigrants here. Let's face it, nobody even knows who were the original inhabitants of these islands. That's lost in history. You are welcome here. And if you've chosen to make your home here, thank you. We're glad and you're welcome. Naomi doesn't help the situation. Instead of introducing her as this faithful sister-in-law who stood by her in her hour of need, she says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Naomi is standing there listening, saying that's all you are, you're just emptiness. This is emotion speaking. This is not rational thought. Naomi is overwhelmed by her own grief. She's deep in self-pity and can't see beyond it. Ruth has totally accepted Naomi, but has Naomi fully accepted Ruth at this point? It seems like, looking back, she did her best to shake her off. Perhaps she sees her as an encumbrance, the foreigner who tagged along. Maybe she didn't think too well of her sons marrying these foreign women. It wasn't popular in those days. Maybe she thought, well, what will the neighbours think, bringing a Moabite back with me? Her over the garden fence. What's going to be the conversation? But whatever Ruth was feeling at the time of this deep rejection, in her own grief and pain and loss, she's lost her husband, she's a widow. But Ruth doesn't strike back. She doesn't dump on Naomi. Whatever she's feeling, she keeps it to herself. But what happens next is even more remarkable. Let's go on to chapter 2. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, Naomi's husband, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field and began to glean, that is to pick up the dropped leftover grain behind the harvesters. And as it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of the harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? That tells you something about the attitude of the day and the time towards women, doesn't it? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please, let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. Ruth has really stooped to the lowest level. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting. Follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you're thirsty, get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you didn't know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. Hundreds of years later, Jesus would stand and look over the city of Jerusalem, and he'd say, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those who sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing." What God's own chosen people wouldn't do, Ruth the Moabitess, the foreigner, did. She chose to bring herself under the wings, under the protection, under the provision of God. He was her only refuge. He was her only hope in this situation. She had nothing but that she'd put her faith in the Lord. She is also the one who takes initiative to provide for the pair, Naomi and Ruth together. Naomi herself is overtaken with grief. She's paralyzed by self-pity. It's Ruth who steps up and saves the day, the young woman, the foreigner. And there was a law, part of the law of Moses in Leviticus 19, that said when you reap the harvest of your land, don't reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Don't go over a vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. And that was known as the law of gleaning. So Ruth goes out to glean. She's going to feed on the leftovers, the things that have been dropped and missed by the harvesters. And she finds herself in the field of this well-to-do relative of her father-in-law, Kenny, in our introduction. And when Boaz finds out who she is, he goes beyond what the law requires of him. He gives her food and drink. He tells his workers, we read a bit later on, we haven't got time to read it all, but he tells them to drop a few sheaves of barley for her to pick up. And she goes home with almost 13 kilos. Imagine carrying that lot back from Tesco. That's not a bad gleaning. That's quite a few leftovers. Boaz has really gone above and beyond to help out this relative of his in her time of need. So let's step on to chapter 3. And I'm literally just kind of telling the story and picking out a few bits and allowing the story to speak to us. I haven't got the usual 3 theological points, bang, 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 tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them and all the rest of it. This is just, it reads best as a story. It is storytelling. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you'll be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you've worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." Now, I'm going to explain what all of this means after I've read it, because it's kind of alien, what follows. "Wash," she said, "put on perfume and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying, because it's going to be dark. Then go, uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth." She said, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." So Ruth's example now provokes Naomi to stand up and take her responsibility. She is responsible as the remaining senior adult of the family to find a husband for Ruth. This is a culture of very much the arranged marriage, if you like. Not a forced marriage, which is a very different thing, but the parents taking responsibility to find a match for the child. And so Ruth's positive attitude has begun to rub off. Naomi starts to find her way out of her depression, her self-pity, PTSD we might call it now. She takes a step towards normalizing her life and taking up her maternal responsibility. Now, there was another law in Israel that related to a man who died married and childless. It said if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her, her brother-in-law, marry her and fulfill the duty of brother-in-law to her. It's pretty weird, ladies, isn't it? But that's what happened. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. Now, Ruth's brother-in-law, her husband's brother, is also dead. He's gone. But the law did permit another close relative to step in and marry her and fulfill the same duty. And the first son born of the union would have been reckoned to the deceased man in order to continue care of his property and carry on the family name. That was how it worked. And Naomi very cleverly and wisely shows Ruth how to put this as a proposal to Boaz. Boaz, having demonstrated himself as a man of kindness and good character and honor, to put that as a proposal to him privately in a way that doesn't put him publicly under unfair pressure to agree or to risk humiliating him if he declines. It's risky. It relies very much on Boaz's good character and honor because he could easily take advantage of Ruth in the situation that she's putting herself in. But she finds the courage. She goes to him in secret and she lays at his feet and waits to see his reaction. And when it's not negative, she puts her proposition. The invitation to cover her with his blanket was symbolically an invitation to him to take her under his protection and under his provision, to cover her, just like the image of the hen gathering the chicks under her wing that was used earlier. Now, he's a wealthy man, a man of standing in his community. She is a poor, destitute widow. He is a devout Jew. She is the daughter of an uncircumcised foreigner. This is not a proposal that seems likely to fly. You look at it from Boaz's point of view, this is not really a terribly attractive proposition. But Ruth may be poor, she may be a widow, she may be a foreigner, but she has one thing going for her. All the people of my town, Boaz said, know that you are a woman of noble character. People had seen her character through her actions, through her care for Naomi, through her proactiveness, through her ability to rise above her own circumstances, and most importantly, even in her own grief and need, to be sensitive to the grief and need of someone else. She is one lady. I've got to tell you, this is an amazing story. This would make a great musical. You can kind of see the points where people spontaneously burst into song. Oh, la, 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 la. Yeah. Perhaps someone will write it one day. Maybe they have. I don't know. So Boaz then accepts. He says, I will do what you ask. He is happy to take Ruth as his wife. But, that's the, comes on. But there are a couple of complications. Firstly, and this is one of the bits that there just isn't time to read, there is a closer relative who had first dibs on marrying Ruth, basically. He had first call. It was his first responsibility. And when Boaz puts it to this guy, at first he agrees. He says, no, I will marry her. Then Boaz reminds him of another complication. that whoever marries Ruth must also buy back what Kenny and Naomi sold when they went to Moab and restore it to Naomi and Ruth for Ruth's eldest son, to preserve the family line and the family name and to provide the family with a source of income going forward. And when that's put to him, he declines, and the way is open. In the way of every good romance, there's a happy ending. The door is open for Boaz and Ruth to marry. And so in chapter 4, Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer." That was the role that Boaz fulfilled. "May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Ruth then had at least 2 sons, because the first would have been reckoned as the son of Mahlon, her dead husband, but Obed is recorded as the son of Boaz, the man who stepped in and rescued her. And through Ruth, the Moabitess, the poor widow, the unwanted daughter-in-law, the unwelcome foreigner, the outsider, was born David, the greatest king in Israel's history, and a prophetic sign of the Saviour who was to come. And we can see in Boaz that Saviour figure who stepped in and rescued Ruth. And he and his grandson, or maybe great-great-great-grandson, there might be a few generations missing. There often are in the genealogy. But through his descendant, that image of David, and ultimately Jesus is born from the family line of Boaz and Ruth. Now, not many of us will have our names written in history. It's unlikely that if you were to search Wikipedia in 100 years' time, that the name of Bruce Townsend might be there. Well, the name might be there, but it won't be me. I can pretty much guarantee that. But we can each write our own history. And we can all be part of somebody's history and somebody's life. And we can all be a blessing to someone in the way that Ruth was to Naomi and ultimately to Boaz. Ruth, you see, chose to put her trust in God and embed herself in his family. Even faced with her own pain and loss, she didn't harden herself to the grief and loss and pain of Naomi. Through trusting God, she developed a good character that was seen in her behavior and her attitude, visible to all. And through that, she found a way to accept her responsibilities and move forward. And she made herself a blessing to those around her and wrote her name into their history. And all I can say about that is, in the words of Jesus, let's go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Amen? Amen.